Welcome to Confessions of a Terrible Leader, where real leaders share the raw truth about the lessons they learned the hard way so you don't have to. Join our host, Lacey Nelson, founder of Transcend Leadership Collective and former terrible leader. On this podcast, we invite you to step into the confessional and get real with the messy stories and behind-the-scenes reality of leadership. Let's get to it.
Hello, friends, and welcome back to Confessions of a Terrible Leader. I'm your host, and let us not forget, former terrible leader, the queen of terrible leaders herself, Lacey Nelson. I am so glad to have all of you here today to meet the amazing James Oyola. James, welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you for having me.
Just to give listeners a little insight, you have an extensive background in multiple corporate settings, big organizations that are household names literally across the globe. And you have recently released a book, which is your, I believe, second book, if I remember correctly from our conversation, The Helpful Leader. All right, there's so much to talk about today. What I want you to share with our listeners is, how does one get to a point in life where they're like, you know what? I think I should write a book. That's a big step. And you're second nonetheless. Fill us in.
Yeah, it's a good question, and thank you for having me, Lacey. Yeah, I think for me, so when I was in college, journalism was my major, and so I was a sports writer for 8 years. And so I kind of cheated a little bit. I learned, thank you to my English professor, who was also my guidance counselor or my counselor in college my freshman year. He saw the gift in me. Initially, my major was physical therapy, and biology was kicking my butt. And so he basically said, "Hey, you might have to reconsider." And I'm like, "Man, I don't have a plan B." And he said, "Have you ever thought about being a writer?" He said, "You have a unique writing ability." And I said, "No, I don't like to read, let alone write." So he said, "When you do read, what do you read?" And I said, "Oh, easy, anything that's revolved around sports and entertainment." And he said, "Why don't you be a sports writer?" And I said, "Ooh," the light bulb went off, and he connected me with the editor of the school paper the following week. And that kind of began a new career. And so, yeah, I have to say that because I cheated a little bit. Writing came natural to me. But I also recognize that there's a responsibility to any gift that we may have. And so that was my responsibility. And so putting what was on my heart on paper was something that I was passionate about. My first book was called Get Out of Your Own Way. It's a purpose driven piece, just encouraging people to pursue the purpose for which they were created, to live that out. And then the second one, released 11 years later, this past February, is The Helpful Leader. And so for me, how does someone get to that point is passion mixed with talent, but more important than that, a lot of confidence, because you never know the result of what you put out. And so I'm grateful that I've had people in my life to encourage me in all three areas.
I love that. So the helpful leader, for the listener that might be interested in like, well, what does that even mean? Or why should I pick up this book? Who did you write it for?
So if I wrote it for myself, first and foremost,
Good answer. Good answer.
to constantly remind myself of my core values as a helpful leader. And, outside of that, I wrote it for anyone who has fallen on their face in leadership, for anyone who has a misunderstanding of the privilege and responsibility that it is to lead anyone. And this isn't limited to someone who leads at the corporate sector. This includes the coach of a softball team. This includes a spouse in a marital union. This includes an older sibling with three younger siblings. Anyone who has a fortunate pleasure to have people after them, to people that look to them for guidance and for insight and wisdom. And so I wrote that for them. I wrote that for people who have meant well when it comes to relationships, but the actual mechanics of the relationships didn't transpire, maybe because of a blockage in communication, a preconceived bias or anything of that nature, or it's just issues at the heart, maybe some trauma that hasn't been identified and healed and worked through. I wrote that for them. I wrote that for the people who have an honest desire to do well and to contribute to society in a major way, but have had trouble articulating, communicating, and even more importantly, embodying that message.
I think if we're honest with ourselves, that's probably all of us at some level have had that one of at least one, if not all of the boxes checked for like, oh, yep. Would you unpack for us a little bit more about what happens when we don't work through our own trauma. And I think trauma is a word that gets maybe overused or misunderstood. Just unpack for us, A, what is, when you say trauma, what does that mean? And then B, what happens when we don't look at it, when we don't quote unquote do the work?
Yeah, good question. I think for me, just speaking from my own experience, trauma, I would say wounds that I have in the heart, things that I experienced in my childhood. Maybe it wasn't something that was done directly to me, but maybe it was something that I witnessed. My reference point for what marriage is supposed to be, for what manhood is supposed to be, from what an older brother, which I am, is supposed to be. So I'd say anything that was not in alignment with the overall code, as the good book says, do unto others as you want done to you. And so I think for me, that's how I would define that. The result of it, in my experience, if I can center it on a term, it would be offense. I've seen so many people unintentionally offend people, and that be the cause of disruption in relationships. That it's sad to see, where they don't realize that the way that they communicate to someone is predicated on how they view them. Or, I'll give you a short example. I had a young lady that I worked with. She was on my team. I was her manager, and we had a great relationship. And one day, she did something that I was disappointed in. And I told her, I said, "Man, I'm really disappointed in you." A few days later, she came to my office. She asked if she could speak to me. We had that level of confidence, that trust, and I said, "Sure." And she respectfully asked me to not ever tell her again that I was disappointed in her. And when I tried to unpack that, what she ended up sharing was that her father used to tell her that. And she had such a close relationship with her father that when she would hear that from him, it would destroy her.
Mm,
And so that to me showed so much, right? It showed that there was a wound that wasn't healed. It was identified but not healed because, someone once told me adult problems are the result of unresolved childhood issues. Now I had a chance to kind of enter her world and understand that. Just something as simple as, man, I'm disappointed in you. I may think, is this a basic statement because the expectations I have from one professional to another, but it can permeate someone's soul in a much deeper way that we have no clue.
right, right. And I think so often what happens is when we don't have the training or the understanding or the skill set to be curious, we immediately can interpret that as her being too sensitive, or she can't take feedback, or she doesn't really want to work hard. We create and spin all of these narratives, then continue the relationship as though they're fact. My question is, what did you do as a leader to have her feel like she could come to you? That's a very vulnerable, very personal thing for her to be willing to tell you. What groundwork was laid? What relational capital did you have to invest to get to that point with her?
Good question. I think it's something that I try to live by is I pay more attention to the person than I do the professional. What that looks like is as an employee on my team, if I have the privilege to lead a team, as I've done in my career for the last 20 years, I've learned that if I invest more, and by invest, I mean just the energy that I give to the professional only. What does that look like? It looks like, hey, did you get those reports done? Hey, we have a meeting. Are you ready for the meeting? If my only dialogue is related to their contribution as an employee of the company, I think the person behind that title will suffer.
Mm,
However, if I shift and take more of a soul centered or a human centered approach, and I spend more time, regardless of 60/40, 70/30, but more time investing in the person, my energy towards the person, I think the professional will thrive. So, what
mm,
does that look like? That looks like, hey, I remember in the meeting you said you had to leave early because your grandmother was sick last week. How is she doing? Or, hey, I know your son plays travel baseball. Didn't you guys have a district championship a week ago? What was that like?
right.
Taking more in an interest in her, I think that's what got us to that point because we had not only a professional relationship, but she knew that I cared. I took an interest in her family. I took an interest in her hobbies because to me, those are very important elements of a person's life that transcend who they are as professionals. And I believe that was the catalyst for her guard to be down and not treat me as just her boss, but to understand that the boss was just a title that I held. But deeper than that, I care about her and everyone on my team as a human being.
I love that. We know we have a lot of similarities in the way that we approach leadership, soul centered leadership, heart first leadership. Like there's so much overlap that we have. And I know when I'm working with clients, I will often receive sometimes a pushback of, wait, yes, we do need to treat people like people, and they acknowledge everything that you just shared is valid. However, there's pushback often comes with how do you square that while at the same time holding people accountable for the performance that they need to be held accountable to. What's your approach to that?
Yeah, great question because, currently I work for FIFA. We're getting ready to put the World Cup on. And
Just
so
a
it's an
little
amazing
project.
privilege. Yeah, just a little project. Amazing privilege and blessing. And it's helped me grow exponentially in my leadership
Mhm.
philosophy. Prior to that, I was a vice president of a health insurance company. For the last 10 years, I've had the fortunate blessing to occupy titles of director and up.
Mhm.
I say that because what I appreciate most about that experience is it has allowed me the autonomy to have workshops around emotional intelligence. No one is checking for me when I pull my team off the production floor
Right.
and I'm having a seminar on how to just be a more effective communicator with your peers and the customers.
Right.
And yes, I've also had encounters with my superiors, mostly have been C suite personnel who felt, what's the return on that investment? How do I see that in dollars? There's so many cases that can be made. One small one is just turnover. The amount of money that it costs a company to hire and retrain because somebody left due to poor management. To me, that's my pin for their balloon. But what I have kind of learned in my experience is I'm sure you've probably heard the notion of leave your problems at the door. Have you ever heard that said
Oh
in the
yeah, I
corporate
hate that
sector?
saying.
Me too. Me too. I've had superiors tell me that, hey, we're not their therapists, we're not their counselors. And I've always kind of been against that frame of thinking because I think it's humanly impossible. And the very people who say that we need to do that, they don't do that themselves. And so what I've learned, because yes, the truth of the matter is that my responsibility is to the business first. I have an allegiance to the organization to help them meet their goals, right? And then my responsibility is do I get the workforce to do that? So I'm not a leave your problems at the door type of person. I'm more of a how can I help you compartmentalize what you're going through? How can I help you put that in your mental locker so that it doesn't consume you while you're at work? I'm more of a helping the person understand how much we need them, how much of a contributor they are to the success of this business, and how what they're experiencing, it's real, it's true. And I can only sympathize or empathize on what they're going through. How do I meet them where they are and help them navigate through that in such a way where it doesn't risk their future employment? That is where I've done the most of my work. And so while I'm confronted with the show me what this looks like in dollars, I've always held the line to making a point of the inverted pyramid per se, right? The CEO shouldn't be at the top of the pyramid. He should be, or she should be at the foundation, at the bottom, holding everything up by way of how they live their life.
Yes, I find holding people accountable and understanding them as full humans, it actually gets easier to hold them accountable. If you're having regular check ins, regular conversations, hey, I know you have a lot going on right now. I know this deadline is coming right up and you're like maybe 30% to completion. Am I understanding where you're at right now? And if you are behind, how can we adjust or what supports do you need to be able to execute this on time given the reality of your life at the moment? Like it becomes a much easier conversation and it doesn't tend to alienate like when you don't have any relationship with them and all they're hearing from you is you're behind, you're not doing your job well enough, and I'm not happy with you is the typical interpretation.
Yeah, and if I could just add to that, what other conversations are more digestible to have is if you have to terminate somebody.
Yes, go into that, please.
Yeah, so there's a chapter in The Helpful Leader called Graceful Exits.
Mhm.
And the premise of the chapter is, in a nutshell, in leadership and business, or even, you might have to put somebody on the bench on the sports team or kick them off the team for whatever
Right.
reason, right? But we don't have to do those or have those conversations in a way that makes somebody feel less than. How do you terminate someone but allow them to leave that office with their dignity, or even further, feeling a little better about themselves? I have been able to do that in my career. Those conversations are the most gut wrenching and the ones I avoid the most because I do
I know.
care. But I'm so grateful because, to your point, you're absolutely right. The foundation of the interpersonal relationship, the intentionality and interest that I take in my team. How do I make everyone on my team feel like they're my favorite? That's my goal.
Mm,
Not to
I
cause any
love
kind of
that.
a war, but
Right.
I want everyone to feel special, right? In my eye, as they see me see them. And that journey has allowed me, for the most part, in certain conversations where we have to part ways, that conversation doesn't have to be as an emotional wreckage as it is. It doesn't have to make someone feel like they're insignificant or less than, because they know I care. And I like to frame it in a simple example, like say, hey, listen, mate, you dance really well. You're the best dancer I know. But this song and this style of dancing might not be your forte. It doesn't mean that you can't dance. It just means that the music that we're playing here might not suit your dancing style. How can I help you find a song or a type of rhythm that helps suits your dancing style? So I don't want them to lose the good dancer that they are, the courage and the self-empowerment just because it's not working at this company. I want them to know that it will work and it can work at a company that suits you best. And so yes, I do
Right.
feel like that relationship helps that.
Yeah, that's such a good point. Yes, I always say if you ever just get really comfortable with firing, you're not doing something right. Like it always should be uncomfortable to take away someone's livelihood, right? You are majorly impacting their life. Yes, they can go find another job. However, you are impacting their life in a big way. One of the things that the conversations that I've found helpful and just swapping stories is having to let someone go that I knew they were absolutely miserable coming in to work. Something had shifted, but they played their cards very tight to their chest. Not everyone's going to let you in. They're not. No matter how effective you are, not everyone is going to feel, for whatever reason, safe enough to really fully show you their cards, right? So I didn't entirely know what was going on with this guy. I just knew he was not happy and I didn't know what it was. And I sat down to have the conversation, and his performance was like he was showing up late, he was leaving early. I mean, he was going through the motions, all of the signs of like disengagement, and I don't want to be here. When I sat him down, I asked the question with, "Hey, number 1, are you doing okay?" Just doing that check-in, and I knew because I've had the talk before, I knew he likely wasn't gonna give me much, and he didn't, and that's okay. He's not obligated. The next thing I did was use the phrase in not a condescending way. Tone is really important. But, "Hey, you seem very unhappy coming into work for the past several weeks, and I'm really trying to figure out what's going on. If I'm reading you right, if I'm misunderstanding the situation, please tell me, but you seem genuinely pretty miserable." And he was like, I hate it here. But he needed that on ramp to be able to
Yeah.
have that permission, right? To say, I actually am not happy here. And it, at that point, figured out the change he needed had nothing to do with anything we could control. It had to do with him feeling like he'd settled in life and he didn't have the trajectory to get where he wanted to go if he was to continue in this environment. That completely changed the conversation, and it went from, "Oh, well, let's figure out how to get you out of here." It went from I was gonna have to, like, set some benchmarks, do corrective action, like, we were at that point, to a, like, "Alright, well, let's offboard you. Like, go what do you wanna be doing? Go find another job. How much time do you need?" And boy, was that a much better ending for both of us, but it wouldn't have happened without curiosity, and I had to take a risk because this guy was not open, and I knew he wasn't, but I still wanted to always continue to just give the platform, give the opportunity, and let him choose to step on it or not, step up to the conversation or not. Does that make sense?
Oh, 100%. As you're articulating that, I'm just envisioning what that conversation was like. And I love that you used your authority in a way to provide some psychological safety for this individual so that he can feel comfortable in sharing, like, yes, like I hate it here. Because the reality is that it's the truth. It's and I know, people at the upper echelon of the corporate sector, they don't wanna hear that. I started the Helpful Leader literally, and I questioned if I should have, but I felt more at peace with breaking down the evolution of leadership from, like, the early 1900s. I didn't go into too much detail, but I wanted to set a foundation of what the mentality was like, and it used to be, hey, do what I need you to do. If not, I'll find someone else who can. And so I love the opportunity that you presented this gentleman because you gave him a chance to be honest and transparent. One of the things that have perplexed my bosses in this context of terminations, I've written so many letters of recommendation for people that I've let go.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Well, why would you do that? You let them go." And I'm like, "No, listen, there's a distinction here, right? Their ability to perform and meet the needs of the business doesn't necessarily equate to their character or who they are as people, their personality. And so I'm going to speak to their personality. I'm going to speak to things that did really good. And that's my letter of recommendation. The little things that might go unseen or hidden, with me they don't because I'm always watching. Behavior science is one of my favorite topics. And so I'm constantly studying the way anybody I engage with, my wife hates it, but anybody I engage with, the way that they react, the way that they see the world. And I love what you presented this gentleman because there was an alignment. You guys might
Mhm.
not have been aligned on performance, but what you were aligned on was that there's something off and we need to figure out next steps. And so I love that.
Thank you. And I think too, what I hear that shared common thread in both of our styles is I want everyone to believe they're my favorite, right? Like I always tell my kids I have two favorite kids and I have two least favorite kids. I only have two kids. So
Yes, I
yes, I always tell my kids that. You want everyone to believe that and you want to find the best and we both want to see that. And if people believe when they come into work that you really like them, you genuinely have their best interest at heart, and their well being as a human is more important than a bottom line. Now, those things can't stay out of alignment forever. Like we said, sometimes it does mean, like, well, your well being and the bottom line are too far apart. So we're going to have to make some adjustments. But if it's done with what's the most important thing is you in this equation, and let's do this in a way that's graceful, that's honoring to you, that helps you take the right next step, even if that's not here. That's such a shift. A lot of leaders, until they experience it, have a hard time believing is you're actually going to keep your teams longer and they're going to want to work harder for you if that's your approach.
Yeah. And if I can just add to that, in my industry, especially in the last 10 years, I've had my direct reports who are salaried employees, and I've had the people who report to them who are hourly employees. And one of the things that I would task my direct reports with, and I've led some pretty large teams cross culturally. I led a team one time of 90 people between Jamaica, South Africa, and the United States. And so there's a whole lot that comes with that from a cultural standpoint, right? But one of the things that I task my people who lead the rest of the larger group with is because when you think of humanity, right, for some weird reason, most people, at least that I've met, usually begin to think less of themselves before they think more of themselves. Why is it that my default thinking as a human being tends to be more negative than positive? It's like a child, right? I have four children, two older boys, two younger girls. We had to teach them how to share. But what was innate within them was a level of selfishness. Where does that come from, right? I task my direct reports with helping the people on their team understand their significance within the larger picture.
Mhm.
I when I didn't work for Home Depot, but they were a client of mine. It was a $200 million account.
Mhm.
So how do I help someone who's making $15 an hour feel like their 40 hours a week makes a significant impact in that $200 million a year revenue stream?
Right.
That to me was the magic and the mystery. Some people might feel like they're insignificant, no one really cares, this company's too big for me, I'm just someone
Mhm.
that's invisible to them. And so that's what I would always task my team is along the lines of my favorite. It's also like, man, do they know how important they are? Do they know that missing 1 day of work is highly significant to the impact of this business? Not so much because it's them, but it's because of what they mean to the overall goal.
Right. Their work means so much and what they bring matters. It really does count. Okay, James, I know there's no way that you've gotten to this level of awareness in your life without getting there, likely without some tears, some frustration, some really screwing it up as a leader. It is now time to welcome you into the confessional, my friend, to share your story of a moment of terrible leadership and how it's impacted you today in the way that you lead.
Man, just one moment.
Right. I know. I know. I literally could write a book just on my mess ups for real.
So many. Yeah, I think one I would say in my younger days of leading, I still had the same concept at heart. The path to achieve that was more of be their friend. There's a difference
Mm.
between taking an interest in someone as a person and wanting to be their friend.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. Expand.
I think I wanted to be the cool boss, right?
Yeah.
For the happy hours and,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
play pool and I like to bowl. It backfired a little bit because it did achieve the relational equity that I think we all seek, but it blurred the lines of the hierarchy. And I'm not a hierarchical type of person, but it could send the wrong message if we're at happy hour or we're just at a dinner and then we go play pool afterwards. And I don't have to have a sip of alcohol, but I just being in that environment can blur the lines the next morning when we have to have hard conversations or when I have to deliver a message on behalf of the larger group, where we might need to turn this ship around. Yeah, I would say that really just not understanding the difference between like loyalty and respect or, taking an interest in someone versus being their friend.
Yeah.
It did backfire because certain people were like, "Oh, James, he's cool. He's cool. It's James. Like we
Right.
love James,
Right.
which is great." But I needed more respect and trust than I needed love and validation, if that makes sense.
It absolutely makes sense. And one of the hardest boundaries, I think, for most of us in leadership to have learned, and there's not a formula, there's not a rule because it's all going to be intrinsic and unique to your own internal boundary. And I haven't found a better way to say this, but I think that at some point, your line's going to be different than mine because we're different people. But we know when a line of intimacy with another person crosses from a friendly professional relationship to oh, you're like a friend. You're like on the inside. I'm going to be talking to you like you're my friend. And I code switch when that happens because I will drop back into what I'm most comfortable, right? Like how I grew up. For me, it looks like a lot of just like banter on texting and stuff. I could go out to people with happy hour in that environment all day long, and I'm going to be absolutely fine as long as I don't have too much to drink. Like, whole nother podcast, but I'm going to be fine and I'm not going to struggle with those boundaries. But if I do cross that boundary into really dropping the way I speak professionally and then also bantering back and forth on text that has nothing to do about work, like that's my line. But neither one of us are right or wrong. It's the importance is a self-awareness, right? Like where is that line in yourself where then it is going to be harder for you to hold the line when you have to really hold the line.
Yeah, and I would say for me, as I've kind of grown up, I'll be 44 next month. I've learned the importance of integrity and character.
Yes.
Because I think boundaries are important. They're healthy. They're necessary. I've learned that, yeah, maybe, if there's a, company dinner, we can do the company dinner. I was just having this conversation with someone last week. We can do the company dinner, but I'm not going out for drinks afterward. First of all, I don't drink, but second of all, I'm just not going to put myself in that position because I have to understand going to integrity and character. What do I represent? Who do I represent? Managing teams across the countries and overseas, one of the things that I was very adamant about was I represent my boss. And when I went to South Africa for work, the people that I engage with are going to measure and define not me, but my boss based on how they engage with me. At the time, my boss's name was Brian. So they're going to say, man, Brian, he picked a good one here. Or they're going to say, what was Brian thinking in hiring this guy? So who I represent, what I represent to me has grown to be, it wasn't always the case, but has grown to be important for me in these settings because yes, the relational equity is important. I want to be aligned. I want to be personable and approachable, but I can't forfeit the authoritative responsibility that I've been given.
Right. Right. So much to learn in leadership. This has been such a good conversation. James, you are in my stack of to be read. You're sitting on the top for next. So, in my business book stack. And I really would love for our listeners that enjoyed this conversation, if they want to get to know James Oyola, what's the best way to get a hold of you, to reach you?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And again, thank you for having me. Yeah, LinkedIn, you can find me on LinkedIn, James Oyola, Oyola. And then the Helpful Leader has an Instagram page. The helpful_leader are the best ways for someone to connect with me offline.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for the great conversation. It's just been awesome. And I look forward to just continuing to walk through this leadership space with you. I have a feeling our paths are going to cross quite a bit. So thank you. And congratulations on your book. What a major step. That's
Thank
incredible.
you. Thank you for
Yeah,
having me. It's a privilege and the pleasure is mine. I really appreciate the time.
absolutely. All right, friends, you know the drill. Until next time, go manage like a leader.
Thanks for listening to Confessions of a Terrible Leader. If you're feeling brave and have your own terrible leader story that you'd like to share, head over to transcendleadershipcollective.com/podcast to fill out a guest application. We'd love to hear from you. Confessions of a Terrible Leader is hosted by Lacey Nelson and produced and edited by Fixation Point Productions. Music is by Leif Olson and Mary Scott from the band The Number of Months. Confessions of a Terrible Leader is a free leadership resource offered by Transcend Leadership Collective. If you are ready to refuse the limits of average leadership and join the leadership revolution, visit transcendleadershipcollective.com to check out our offerings for engaging workshops, strategic planning, and more. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a review. And until next time, go manage like a leader.